Thank you, Erin. They had been waiting a long time. The old woman, the enormous tree, and the 3 fairy hounds had been waiting. But they were good at waiting, for they were all well practiced in living in the now. And in the now, it does not matter if you are waiting for a minute or a millennium. It is all the same. But still, this now was challenging, and they had been waiting. When the woman of middling age, in an old coat and worn out boots, pack on her back, walking stick in hand, veered off of the road that went around the hill the woman and tree and hounds were all upon. All she saw and thought about was the spreading branches of that enormous tree and the shade that it was providing, a good place to rest and have her lunch. It wasn't until she had settled down and had pulled out from her pockets her sandwich and her water that she noticed the old woman sitting there right beside the tree. She didn't seem to have come from anywhere. She must have been there all along. Oh, I'm so sorry. I did not mean to disturb you. I'm just taking a rest for lunch. Have enough to share if you'd like some. And so she shared her sandwich and her water with the old woman. And as they ate, the traveling woman, entertained with a few of the tales of her travels. And as she was packing up after eating, the old woman spoke for the first time. Daughter, please, will you help me? We have been waiting a long time. Will you help? Well, of course. What can I do for you? My grandmother's tinderbox. I have lost it. It's in this tree, and I am no longer able to fetch it myself. Will you fetch me my grandmother's tinderbox? Your grandmother's tinderbox inside the tree. Oh, I know this story. Never much cared for it, though. You know, that young man, he just took and he took and he took, and oh, no consequences, really. And this is not that story. This is now. Will you get me my grandmother's tinderbox? Of course, I'd be happy to. And the old woman put her hand upon the trunk of the tree. And as soon as she did so, the tree split open, creating a doorway. And at the bottom of that doorway, the traveling woman could see a handmade ladder reaching down into the dark depths of the earth. You know, tinderboxes are kind of old-fashioned. They're not really very useful these days. Wouldn't you rather have a flashlight or some matches? I have some I'd be happy to give you. And she pulled out from her pockets flashlight and matches and handed them to the old woman, who took them, but said, "It is my grandmother's tinderbox that I need, and you promised to get." Of course I did. And now she saw that she would be going down into the earth without her flashlight and matches. But she did know stories, and she knew things did not go well if you did not do what an old woman by the side of the road asked you to do. And she had promised. So she started down that ladder into the earth. It did not take more than a few rungs before the darkness pressed in all around her, so that the traveling woman closed her eyes, feeling more comforted by the darkness behind her lids than that pressing around her, and so felt her way entirely by touch until her boots hit the dirt floor. And then she opened her eyes again. She could barely make out that she was in a room, a living space, it seemed like, for there seemed to be a shadowy shape like a bed, and closer by a table and chair. But it was hard to make out much else, except around the curved edge of the wall right beside her, she saw 3 doors. 3 doors. Just like in the story that this wasn't. The old woman had mentioned nothing about the doors or what the traveling woman knew for sure must be behind them, guardians and treasure. But she was in the middle of a story, so how could she not open the doors? She went to the first one beside her, opened the door, and the first thing that she noticed was the light. For this room was lit up with a red glow, and the glow was coming from the eyes of an enormous hound. Its eyes were as big as teacups, and they were spinning round and round, glowing red, lighting the room. The hound sat upon an equally enormous trunk. The woman went into the room, dug out of one of her pockets her tea towel, spread it on the ground, and as soon as she did, the hound that had been on the trunk was suddenly like smoke shifting on the ground beside the tea towel. Oh, very well. I might as well take a look since you're not on the trunk anymore. And she opened it up. Just like in the story. Copper coins. Looks like a small fortune indeed, but it's really too heavy to be carrying around, and I have no need for it. So, I'm really more a collector of stories. Perhaps I could share one with you. And how about a spot of tea while I tell you the tale? So the woman sat down, pulled out her thermos of tea and her traveling teacup and saucer, poured herself a hot cup of tea and a bit more in the saucer before giving it to the hound. The hound's long, sinuous tongue, delicately as a cat, lapped at the tea as the woman began her tale. There were once 3 monks who were out on pilgrimage. Oh, they had walked a long, hot, dusty road, and they were tired when they saw by the side of the road an old woman sitting there with a tea table, a tea stand with 3 chairs right there, and the old woman waved them over. The monks were so grateful. They came and sat down, each of them not able to wait. They were so eager to slake their thirst with the tea. But even as they were starting to reach out, the old woman said, "Let those of you with miraculous powers drink the tea." Well, each one of those monks sat back. Not one of them wanted to claim, especially amongst his fellows, that he had miraculous powers. They were but simple monks. "Very well then," said the old woman. "Let me demonstrate my miraculous powers." And so she eased herself up out of her chair, shuffled over to the table, lifted up the teapot, though it was heavy and her arm shook a bit, and carefully, slowly, she poured the tea into each teacup and then put down the teapot. And the monks drank. It's a sort of story that you can think about. A good story for when you're drinking tea, or if you're stuck in a room underground. The woman picked up her tea things and put them away and headed towards the door, with the hound right at her heels. And well, she didn't like to shut the door in the hound's face, so she left it open. And the hound sat on the threshold, his tail thumping on the dirt floor, as his eyes followed her as she went to the second door. When she opened the second door, she saw again another enormous hound and trunk, but this hound was even larger, for it had eyes as big as dinner plates, spinning round and red and lighting up the room. The woman went in, pulled out her tea towel, and this hound immediately pounced as if upon a rabbit, and the woman, thinking perhaps she was the rabbit, jumped out of the way as quickly as she could and stumbled over the trunk. But the hound just sat beside the tea towel and looked at her expectantly. Since she was there anyway, she opened up the trunk. Yes, just as I suspected. Silver coins. Oh, there must be, more money here than I could possibly count. Certainly more than I can carry. You look like you could use a little something. And while I find some bread and cheese for you, how about I tell you a tale? And so she dug about in her pockets and gave the hound some bread and cheese that the hound snapped up in 2 bites as she began her tale. There was once a potter. Oh, he was a talented potter, but a peasant, but talented. Everything he made was utilitarian. Regular dishware you could use every day, platters and plates and bowls, even teacups. But he made them with such care and such expertise. The shape of them perfect, the weight in the hand, so comforting. And the decorations, works of art that you could enjoy every day. Now he had spent the whole of the cold season preparing a whole kiln full of beautiful platters and plates and bowls and teacups. And now it was time to take them to market. And he had so much that he had made this time, and he was so anxious to get to the market, to start to sell them and earn a little money so he might make it through the next cold season, that instead of taking many trips out to the cart to take him to market, he piled them all one upon the other, platters, plates, bowls, teacups, in an enormous pile, and he took them all at once in his arms. They were so tall he could not see before him anything but what he was carrying, and his foot slipped upon a rolling stone, and he fell backwards to the ground as all of his work crashed into pieces around him. All of his work. He just lay there on the ground. Well, there were other villagers around who were there, who had seen this. Some were a little farther away, preparing themselves to go to market and not wishing to be part of any of that bad luck, just lent on their own. Others were closer by, but they were so horrified by what they saw that they just stood there in shock. It was only his little daughter who saw all this, and she came running to her father, threw herself down on the ground on her back, and laughed until her father, the potter, was comforted. Well, I suppose I'd best be getting on. There's still another door to check out. And so she cleaned up her tea towel and headed towards the door, Hound right beside her. She left the door open again, and the Hound sat on the threshold, his tail now thumping in unison with his fellow. Both hounds watched her as she went to the third door. She opened the door and stepped back. It was so full to the brim with hound and chest. This hound was bigger than any hound had the right to be. Its eyes were as large as wagon wheels, spinning round and red in such a dizzying fashion that she tripped in as she was trying to spread out her tea towel, and the next thing she knew, she was flat on her back on the dirt floor, eyes closed against the spinning of those red eyes. The ground underneath her felt almost like a hug, holding her. And when she opened her eyes and looked up, she saw not the sky, of course, but roots thick and twining, like living ceiling beams. And as she started to untangle herself from her pack, and her walking stick had been stuck in the straps, and sit up, she saw the hound. That enormous hound was there beside her, on his back. She rubbed his belly. Indeed, it is a comfort to have someone there when you've fallen. No, I don't think I will actually get up and check that last trunk. I know what's in it. I know this story, even if it isn't that story. There's gold in your trunk, isn't there? So much gold. But I have no need of gold. I have stories. But it looks like I don't have a walking stick anymore. And indeed, there was a hairline crack going all the way down. She was fond of that walking stick, but she gave it to the hound to chew upon as she began a story. There was once a grandmother, an old woman, who had been a potter in her youth, but now her hands were stiff and clumsy, so she didn't make any more pots or go to market, but just stayed in her little hut and got by with her garden. And she had 2 pots left that she'd made, her water pots, a matched pair. And since she had no running water in her hut, every day she took those water pots on a pole across her back to the stream. She'd fill up her pots and bring them back, and it would be enough water for the day. Well, then one day her granddaughter came to visit her from the city to check on how she was doing, all by herself in that hut with no running water. And she was appalled to see her grandmother having to carry those pots all the way to the stream and back. She insisted the first morning she was there that she would carry the pots for her grandmother. And she went to the stream and she did that, and she brought them back. She was again appalled. Grandmother, this pot is no good. It has a crack. You can't hardly tell, but it clearly has a crack, for it was full when I filled it at the stream, and now I've brought it all the way back, and it's half empty. Oh, it's fine, my dear. It's a good pot. It brings me enough. No, this is a terrible way for you to live. You cannot keep here. You need new pots, or better yet, you should come back with me to the city. Stay with me. I will take care of you now. That is not necessary, my dear. I am perfectly capable of taking my pots and getting the water and bringing them back, and this pot is perfectly good. Come with me tomorrow. I will show you how I can get the water and how good this pot still is. So the next morning, the grandmother took her pots on the pole across her back, and her granddaughter accompanied her as they walked to the stream. Grandmother walked more slowly than her granddaughter would have on her own, but she walked steadily and easily with the pots. At the stream, she filled them up, and though they were now heavy, she still walked with power and strength. But as they walked back, she asked her granddaughter, "Now, what do you see along either side of the path that we're walking on?" "Oh, well, on one side, there's really not much dirt and rocks, but the other side has an amazing amount of wildflowers. They're so beautiful and so many." "Indeed. And which side of the path is that cracked pot, the no good pot on?" "Well, it's hard to see. It's just a hairline crack, but, oh, yes, that one. It's dripping on the side with the flowers." "With the flowers? Yes. There would be no flowers here at all, my dear, if it were not for that pot. I scattered seeds, but it is the pot that waters them. And it still brings me back enough water for my own needs. It is good enough, and I can take care of myself well enough." Well, I did come down here with a task, and I guess I'd better get on with it. The traveling woman got herself up, put her pack back on, and headed towards the door. Hound right at her feet, so she left that door open too. And that hound added its bass thumping to the rest of his fellows. And now, with all 3 hounds looking out into the living space, the room was illuminated with the red light of their eyes. And the traveling woman could see clearly now the bed and the table and their chair, but, well, where would there be a tinderbox? She didn't exactly know what a tinderbox actually looked like, as she'd only seen them in stories. But she knew what it probably looked like. A tin box. It would have flint in it and a bit of tinder, for making fires. So it would make sense for it to be somewhere near where one might light a fire, but there was no lamp, no stove, no fireplace. Indeed, it did seem not particularly wise to light a fire inside of a living tree. But she did know stories. And even if this wasn't that story, it was awfully like it. And that young man in that story had stuffed his pockets, his shirt sleeves, and his pants tying the edges, stuffed full of gold and copper and silver coins, so he could barely move, forgotten all about the tinderbox as he slowly made his way back up the ladder until at the last moment he found it as he was nearing the entrance. So the woman started back up the ladder, and with the light of the hound's eyes, she noticed and looked along the walls. And out of the dirt, there were shelves of a sort, rocks that were sticking out. And there, not far from the top, was a tin box on one of those shelves. It had to be the tinderbox. She tucked it in her pocket And as she came out of the tree and retrieved the tinderbox from her hand, she saw the old woman standing there flinch back as a blade of sunlight struck the tinderbox, and a burst of light grew between the two women until the woman in the old coat and boots lowered down her hand out of the sun, and she saw that the old woman was no longer old, but young. Only her eyes were the same. I'm sorry, here is your tinderbox, your grandmother's tinderbox. And the old young woman reached out towards the other woman, but instead of taking the tinderbox, she curled the other woman's hands about it and said, "Thank you. We have been waiting a long time. The tinderbox is yours. Use the treasure wisely." Oh, no, I couldn't possibly. It's your grandmother's tinderbox, and I have no need of that treasure. Really, I didn't take a single coin. I don't need that kind of treasure. This is not that story. And the treasure is not what you think it is. Do not dishonor the gift or the responsibility. This is a new story, and it is only just beginning. Oh, of course. Thank you. And the traveling woman in the old coat and worn out boots put the tinderbox in her pocket again. And as she started back down the hill towards the road she'd been traveling on, humming an odd sort of sound of song as her fingers tapped upon the box in her pocket, until words bubbled up on her tongue and she tried them out. Strike the tinderbox. 1, 2, 3. Fairy hounds, bring me what I need. Not my desire, but yours, my beloved. Tree of life, show me the way. And the traveling woman went on her way into her new story.